Hi everyone, welcome to the Autism for Dads webinar. I'm Nelle Francis and my husband Michael is my moderator tonight, and we're your hosts for the next 50 minutes or so. We're the parents of a 28-year-old on the autism spectrum. I have a background in special needs education and I've written many books and programs for children and adults with ASD. On the screen you can see I've written some fiction books, Ben and His Helmet books. I've written Asperger Child Simply Explained, which is a great resource for parents and grandparents and teachers. Sustainable Social Skills, which is a program designed to be implemented and run within schools. We deliver the Sensory Detective Workshop around Australia and internationally. And here in Gympie at home, I deliver the Sensory Detective program to children, teaching them to recognise their body signals in relation to sensory input. Our focus area is on sensory issues, and we believe that all behaviours displayed by individuals on the spectrum are triggered by sensory sensitivities. Through my various roles, I've gained extensive insight and experience with children, teens, young adults, and mature and elderly individuals with ASD. During tonight's webinar, I'll use the terms ASD, autism, ASPI, Asperger's, autism spectrum interchangeably. I'm also inclined to use the male pronoun throughout the webinar, and that's because I have a son on the spectrum and I talk about him all the time. But the information is just as relevant and applicable to girls on the spectrum too. Prevalent rates of males and females is almost even now as knowledge of the female presentation is increasing. It's the same condition, just wrapped in a female package. You may want to take a moment now to type in the chat box whether you have a daughter or a son on the spectrum. During the webinar, we'll be discussing ASD characteristics. We'll give a summary of meltdown, explaining the physiological processes occurring during that process. We'll be talking about parenting methods for autism, behaviour management styles, lifestyle adjustments, and we'll be offering you some parent-to-parent advice for the journey you're on. So let's start the session with a brief explanation of what ASD is. ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder, is a lifelong neurobiological condition that affects the way your child's brain processes information. We know that all behaviour is a form of communication, and for those with ASD, their behaviour is driven by their senses. ASD affects 5 common skill areas: social understanding, communication, repetitive behaviours, difficulty with change, and sensory sensitivities. So what does social understanding look like? Well, your child may have difficulty knowing what to say and when to say it. They may experience anxiety in social or group situations. They might have difficulty making and keeping friends. They have difficulty keeping up with conversations, trouble changing the topic. They're vulnerable to teasing and bullying, and they have trouble knowing the difference between playful and hurtful teasing. Your child will have communication differences, and this affects all aspects of communication: verbal language, body language, facial expression, tone of voice, and gestures. So you can't discipline an ASD child with a look, a frown, or a stance. They have no idea what you mean. They also might have an unusual vocal quality that affects their tone, their pitch, the speed with which they speak, and often they adopt a foreign accent, typically an American accent, but we are seeing some lovely little British and Canadian accents creep in now. They have a literal use of language, so they're confused by idioms and metaphors like, I take my hat off to you, or cross that bridge when we come to it, or hold your horses. They're unable to follow verbal directions, And this is particularly common for multi-layered directions. For example, if you said to them at the dinner table, okay, you can leave the table, scrape your plate into the bin, then rinse it under the tap and put it in the dishwasher, they'll only hear you can leave. So we have to allow for processing time, or just give one instruction and wait until they've actioned that and then move on to the next. They may repeat questions and phrases over and over again, and we call that looping. So sometimes they'll repeat the last part of an instruction you've given them, or sometimes they will repeat phrases they've heard on TV or a movie over and over again. They can't read between the lines, so they don't understand inferred or implied meanings. They also have trouble with shades of meaning. For example, a sign that said free-range eggs, the child would take that to mean that the eggs are free. The range eggs are free. Their brains process sequentially, so the first word that's processed is free. That's cute and beautiful when they're 3 or 4 and they pick up a box of those range eggs and take them out the shop because the sign said they're free. But when your child's 18 and does the same thing and the shopkeeper accuses them of shoplifting, things can go really awry because that person will go into meltdown, which shuts down their ability to communicate, and so on and so forth. They have trouble with context. They can have an expansive vocabulary, but little comprehension of the words they're using. They can't read non-verbal cues like facial expression and body language, and they tend to talk at you rather than to you. They can't express concerns or fears, so if you ask them what's wrong, the typical answer is, I don't know, or nothing. And they often have difficulty in making or expressing choices. That's because they seem to have no hierarchy system about choices. When we give them suggestions, if we give them more than one, they can't decide because everything's equally as good to them. So if you ask them if they'd like to go for ice cream or go to Macca's or go to the park, they can't decide because their brains want it all. So what you'll see is a meltdown and you think you've got a selfish or a greedy child on your hands who wants everything. But in their brain, they're thinking, oh, ice cream would be good. Oh, I like Macca's. Oh, I could really do with going to the park. And so that builds intensity and it just goes round and round and round until they're screaming, I want ice cream, I want Macca's, I want to go to the park. So we should help them learn to make choices by only ever offering 2 choices at a time, and we need to try and direct them to what choice we want them to make. So for example, you might say, would you like to go for ice cream or would you like to do your maths homework? Now, sometimes they'll choose ice cream and sometimes they'll choose the math, but we are trying to steer them towards a pleasant outing, which is the ice cream. Child with ASD displays repetitive or ritualistic behaviours, and that may include rocking, flapping, spinning or tapping. They might have a huge interest in one particular topic, for example, dinosaurs, aliens or Minecraft. They really like structure and routine, and they'll feel really anxious when routines aren't followed. They like rules, but sometimes they're better at policing this in others rather than themselves. At home, we might say they're dibber-dobbers, always dobbing on their siblings for breaking the rules. And at school, we would say they're classroom policemen because they know the rules. They seem to not be able to follow them. Now, if this is the case, we need to examine how they've actually interpreted those rules, because there are 3 truths to autism. Your child is rule-oriented, so he likes the rules and he wants to follow them. He also likes to please, and at every moment of every day, he's doing the best he can. So because he does like rules, if he's not following them, you really need to check with him how he's interpreted those rules. ASD individuals have great difficulty coping with change, and that's every change they experience. So your child doesn't like change at all. And we say it's a severe inability to cope with change or adapt to their environments, which is often called cognitive rigidity, the inability to switch gears. They find it really difficult to interpret and process new information, so it's far more comfortable for them if things remain constant and unchanged. As parents, we must always use verbal and visual time warnings to count down to new activities. For example, 15 minutes left on the computer, 10 minutes left on the computer, 5 minutes left on the computer. You need to save now. 2 minutes left. Okay. You must stop now. Make sure it's saved, but understand that you'll be back on the computer after your bath and dinner or tomorrow afternoon. If we tell our child when they're able to re-engage in the activity, they're more likely to be able to stop. Part of the reason for this is that ASD children really need to finish the tasks that they start. Their brain has a desire to finish everything they start, and sometimes that desire almost becomes physical. And we all know that computer games and iPad games, anything electronic, is designed to never finish. There's always the next level, there's always the next add-on, etc., etc. That's how computer programmers and gamers make their money, because it never finishes. So your child's not really being defiant, they're not being disrespectful, they're not trying to piss you off. They're really just doing what their brain has been designed to do, which is finish a task. And if we let them know the next time they can get back on that task, it won't solve your problem overnight, but if we use consistent language over and over again, okay, 2 minutes left, save what you're doing. What's not finished can be finished when you're back on the program tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. So if we reassure them that we're just not cutting them off cold, that they are able to finish, after a while their brain is less, it's less easily startled. They will learn to trust what you say, and they'll have some faith that they can pick up where they left off tomorrow. So your child will experience a lot of anxiety surrounding change, and that's especially with unexpected change. However, a funny phenomenon happens around age 9 or 10. This is when your child will seem to do a complete turnaround and cope much better with spur-of-the-moment activities. This is when we find that too much warning and getting ready for change will actually create anxiety about change. So you really need to be monitoring your child for that stage. Incidentally, 9 or 10 is when the invisible processes of puberty begin, and all the things you thought you knew about autism will go out the window because your child will become extremely different. So if getting them ready for change seems to exacerbate their anxiety and make it worse, try going back to spontaneous or spur-of-the-moment activities and see if that helps them. We all know that life is ever-changing, though, and so I do believe that we need to teach acceptance of change, and that's a process best saved for face-to-face. And in my sensory detective workshop, I deliver specific techniques and strategies to teach acceptance of change. Your child with ASD is really sensitive to sensory input, and they typically have one sense that is more acute than others. Our son has an extremely acute sense of smell. So when we lived on the Sunshine Coast, we lived about 400 metres away from the beach, he could tell us at our front door whether there were blue bottles or jellyfish on the beach before we'd even left home. So typically kids are sound sensitive or touch sensitive. So often if you touch them unexpectedly or without asking, they blow up and become extremely agitated because their brain interprets touch far differently from ours. So it might feel like you punched them or kicked them or hit them when really you just brushed past them. So individuals on the spectrum experience heightened or acute perception of the basic senses, which is sight, sound, taste, touch and smell. And they also have a few other senses. So balance and movement. So we know the balance system is the vestibular system. We all have that, but autistic individuals have particular issues with their vestibular system and their movement system, which is called the proprioceptive system. Further systems they have trouble with is referred mood. And if you want to research that, it's actually called intense world theory. So that means that they feel the emotions and moods of others around them. Temperature regulation difficulties, and that comes under interoceptive signals. Your interoception system handles all your internal body signals, your ability, whether you feel hungry, thirsty, whether you feel sick, whether you are overheated, whether you need to wee or do a poo. All those internal body signals are part of the interoceptive signal. And we know that autistics have very weak interoceptive signals. So your child might not say, oh, I need to go to the toilet soon. What you might get is, I need to wee right now. So they seem to have no early warning system. It's just when things are drastic, that's when they feel it. So we have to help them by offering, instead of saying, do you need to go to the toilet? Let's go to the toilet now. Let's have a drink of water now, because they don't know they're thirsty until they're almost dehydrated. So changing your language a little bit and not offering a choice but saying this is the time to do it can help regulate those systems for them. As a dad or a male involved with someone on the autism spectrum, you need to understand that that child will always have ASD. They don't grow out of it. We can't parent it out of them. We can't punish it out of them. And we can't adopt strategies and techniques that will get rid of autism either. Raising a child on the spectrum is about long-term commitment. Nothing happens overnight with these individuals, but what we're aiming for is to have the skills we're trying to teach them firmly embedded by the time they're 25 or 40. So we have to understand that we're in it for the long haul. And by learning how ASD impacts your child, you can teach them to maximise their strengths and minimise their weaknesses. Sometimes the yardstick we use to measure our kids' progress is the yardstick that neurotypical or children without autism use. And we should just throw that away. That's not relevant to our life. Our kids have uneven skill sets and they progress far differently than those that don't have autism. So we need to understand that our kids do pick up learning and they do learn. They're lifelong learners, but their skills may develop unevenly or differently. So they might have trouble reading, and you'll be lamenting the fact that They're never going to read, and then suddenly they open a book and read fluently. It's like everything drops into place and suddenly they take off. So their brains simply work differently to neurotypical brains. So with support, guidance, and using a variety of strategies, your child will gradually learn to self-assess, self-monitor, and self-manage their condition. And that's where we should be focusing our efforts. We want them to be able to self-regulate and self-manage themselves as adults. There are, of course, great advantages to having ASD. Your child will often have unique ideas that others would never think of, so they're great on a team of problem solvers because they look at things laterally. Your child has the ability to hyper-focus on a particular topic or subject. With motivation, your child will have great determination, and motivation is the key word there. Their inner voice always asks, what's in it for me? So if you can offer them a really good carrot at the end of the stick, they can achieve great things. And we've always found with our son that motivation has to come from within. So if we can find something that he's working towards, or a reward for overcoming a personal challenge is something that he really wants, he'll achieve that. Others might call it bribery, but we see it as helping him achieve his fullest potential, because once they make those gains, once they do something that they never thought they'd be able to do, that helps make them stronger. And you can say next time, look, if you can do X, Y, Z, you can certainly give this a go. So they're just, if we keep them motivated, and we have to be very good ideas people when it comes to motivation. We have to be constantly thinking what would help them strive towards a goal, because the same goal over and over loses appeal after a time, very quickly, really. So your child is fact-driven. Your child is usually great with all forms of new technology. Have you ever noticed that you don't have to give them instructions about anything? They just pick it up. They just know intuitively. Recently, we have some social skill groups going that are run around a particular area of interest. So in our science and tech group, we did a robot build. Now, Michael and I really struggled. We had to really study hard to be able to direct, where the build needed to go. But the children were so intuitive. Everything was on an app, and the model of the robot, every step of the way it was being built, was in 3D, and all they had to do was turn the model around with their finger, dragging their finger on the iPad. We didn't know that. We'd looked at the app. We'd just advanced the screens. We didn't know that it was interactive, that you could, by spinning your finger around on the screen, that you could turn it around and look at it from all angles. And they just intuitively knew that. So always understand that their brains are just wired to be in this 21st century. And rather than think about them negatively, being addicted to screen time, we should see it as an advantage for going forward. Your child has a real thirst for knowledge. They're really good at researching, and they will always be lifelong learners. So a lot of the time in his teenage years, we thought our son was wasting time on the computer or iPad. We thought he was looking at games or whatever, when he was really listening to podcasts or watching documentaries. So his knowledge base grew exponentially in those teenage years when children become sullen and withdrawn. So when he wants to know about something, it's the internet he goes to in the first instance. So rather than viewing your ASD child as something wrong that you need to fix, you can see there are really many strengths and talents at the heart of this intricate condition. But it's not always easy raising a child on the spectrum, and I'm guessing that one of the behaviours you dislike most is meltdown. I'm also willing to bet that you view your child's meltdown as a tantrum, more a battle of wills where you must stand your ground and win. You feel that giving in to your child during meltdown is like they've manipulated you. Well, Michael and I have been there, and that's what we thought too. The authoritarian approach worked for our parents. Surely it would work for us as well. And that's the thing here, guys. There's no rule books about parenting. So all of us naturally lean towards the way we were parented when things get tough. We think if it worked for our parents, it'll work for us too. But parenting our son using the methods we were raised with didn't work for us. Rather than break his will and make him comply, that approach seemed to exacerbate situations and fuel them to new heights. Instead of our son learning how to behave appropriately, we very quickly found ourselves spiralling into an abyss of back-to-back meltdowns and power struggles. So we had to reassess our parenting style and methods, and we really had to go back to basics. And that was tough for us to accept that. We just thought, we tried to parent the way we were. We thought, if we come down hard enough, he'll cave, and that will be that. But it just made things worse. So to reassess our parenting style, we started with 2 statements that really resonated with us. And I need to tell you that we had an extremely tough time with our son between age of 10 to 14 and a half. So he's 28 now, so that was a long time ago. ASD was quite prevalent then, but violent meltdowns weren't. So we lived on the Sunshine Coast, and our son was only one of 2 kids on the coast that were violent at the time. There were plenty that had ASD, but none that got violent. So when we had enough of the poor advice we were given by the professionals treating our son's paediatrician told us we should lock him in the shed till he came good. Someone else told us that gave us a restraint hold to restrain him when he was melting down, and that just served to exacerbate the condition, and he really hurt me badly that day with that restraint hold. Docs told us we could sign him over to be a ward of the state. They would take him off our hands. So none of that was acceptable to us. We had to find a different way of dealing with these meltdowns. We wanted the right to love our son, even if he was out of control. In between his meltdowns, he was a loving, gorgeous kid. It was just those meltdowns they just took your breath away with their intensity. So to reassess our parenting style, we had to go back to basics, and we started with 2 statements that really resonated with us. We know that 1, all behaviour is a form of communication, and 2, sensory sensitivities tend to overwhelm kids on the spectrum. And that's when we started with those statements and broke it down and we mulled that over. That's when we made the leap and connected sensory issues and behaviour. This was a common trigger that we'd been searching for that catapulted our son's behaviour from simply being frustrated or agitated into a state of full-blown meltdown. When he was about 15 and all our violent episodes were well and truly over, he was verbally able to confirm our belief that sensory issues were always the straw that broke the camel's back. He told us that he'd be building towards a meltdown, he'd be putting up with other sensory issues, etc. But then suddenly a smell would hit him and bang, that would make his cup overflow and tip him over the edge. As you've heard, in ASD individuals, sensory processing difficulties encompass all the outer senses, including sound, touch, taste, sight and smell, and the inner senses, the vestibular system, which is balance, and the proprioceptive system, which is to do with muscle tone and the position of your body in space. They also include referred mood and the interoceptive difficulties. So, for those on the autism spectrum, life is like a cactus bush, and they struggle every day to avoid getting pricked or scratched. Very simple, everyday activities such as eating, washing, dressing, learning, playing, working, and loving can be full of unpleasant sensations that their central nervous systems perceive as danger. This manifests in physical responses in them, including a racing heart, tight chest, knotted stomach or nausea, the skin prickles or itches, they may have sweaty palms, their pupils dilate, and they may have a heavy feeling of fear in their legs. But your son or daughter with ASD doesn't interpret those responses as fear, because they just think, what's wrong with my heart? Why am I breathing like this? Why is my skin prickling? And they don't understand, because this all happens before their brain has processed any sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch. So this makes them even more frightened or anxious. However, if the adults around them, that's us, their parents, if we're tuned into them, their fear is visible to us as tension, anxiety, avoidance desire, not wanting to do something, stress, anger, and even violence. So, as ugly as they are, meltdowns are simply a physiological reaction to sensory overwhelm. Now, this is a really in-depth process, and it's too much to go into tonight, but this process and the proven strategies to deal with meltdown more effectively are the topic of, we cover them very deeply in our sensory detective program that we deliver around Australia. So, how do we parent an ASD child more effectively? Well, we do need to adjust our parenting style. We can't parent ASD children the same as others. An authoritarian approach just doesn't work for those on the spectrum. They're very, my best piece of advice to you, but also one of the hardest changes to make, is to deliver your discipline in a neutral tone of voice, just as I'm talking to you now. When we're angry, it's our natural inclination to yell or at least raise our voice, and our tone changes when we're angry. Your sensory sensitive ASD child, their brains notice the subtle change in your voice long before the words or message is decoded. Their brains instantly analyse the tone, and it takes evasive action to that tone. That is, they immediately shut down. So in other words, they can't hear what you're saying because the brain is too busy processing your anger. So as hard as it is, we learnt to say, okay, buddy, we know that you, took the washing machine apart. Tell us what's going on there. Instead of going in like a raging bull, oh my God, you dismantled the washing machine and blah, 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 that's being destructive. So we had to really calm ourselves to get to the bottom of things. And when we started to do this, as tough as it was, we started to get the answers we needed. And often the autistic brain goes off on lots of tangents, and often our son was just interested to see how things worked, which could result in him dismantling a piece of equipment and then thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I didn't mean to wreck it. I just wanted to see how it worked. So when we understood that that's how his brain worked, that he wasn't a destructive kid, that he was really interested in the why, two things happened. If he inadvertently took something apart that was valuable or necessary, we would just acknowledge, okay, buddy, we know that you're not destructive. Obviously, your brain went off on a tangent, and we will help you fix this. So we would help him put it back together piece by piece. We also started frequenting the shop at the recycling centre to purchase electronic stuff or anything that he was interested in that we could take apart. So therefore, we were giving him some avenue for his brain to be able to do that safely. But we also acknowledged that sometimes his brain was on such a one-track pathway that he would do things without realising, if you will. So he was zoned out. When we knew that was a brain process and that he wasn't purposely being destructive, we could manage that a little bit better. Once he learned to trust us, he then started coming to us and saying, I need to see how the microwave oven works. I need to see the components. So he would ask before he took our microwave apart, and we could go and buy one from the dump shop and have him look at that. The school he went to at the time was very progressive, and they got a lot of stuff in like that for the kids to be able to take apart. But the rule there was if you take it apart, you have to put it back together. So it was about learning what the bits were for and how they reassembled. So I don't know if your children are engaged in that, but it seems to be a common characteristic. So your sensory sensitive child will notice the subtle changes in your voice. So we really need to try and deliver our message, but in a very calm voice. Really hard. We found that really hard. Michael found it the hardest. Sam's brain used to shut down if Michael was watching the football and got animated and would start yelling at the TV, or if he was watching the news. And so we knew that his brain startled at the tone of voice because he'd just cry. So applying that was one of the best things we ever did. We might whinge about it later together on our own, and we might have a good offload session, but we certainly didn't do it in front of him. So once you can get that tone of voice under control, your ASD child will respond to discipline much easier, much better. To help you achieve this calmness and a calm tone of voice while you're angry, just tune into your heart rate. If you wear a Fitbit, try and keep your heart rate at a resting beat, so about 65 beats a minute, and that will help you relax, take a few breaths, and it probably is best to lower your voice to a whisper, because it's really hard to be angry when you're whispering. So these are all, I know they sound like simple strategies, but they're hard techniques to adopt. You'll need to practice. Our next piece of advice is to keep any punishment or consequence short and sharp. Choose the thing that motivates your child the most, and it's usually the iPad or a computer game, and ban them from it for a few hours. I know that doesn't sound like punishment at all, but if we punish for too long, or it loses its meaning with kids on the spectrum, and they just think, well, I'm never going to get that back, so I might as well not even like it anymore. And so if we do something short and sharp, if we say, okay, you've lost the iPad for an hour, that will really hit where it hurts and give them a short, sharp taste without sending them into meltdown. Because you know yourself, if we're delivering punishment, it's likely to evoke a meltdown. So we have to punish and deliver consequences in a way that they feel it best. And that's certainly not by tipping them into meltdown. The next thing is that we must have no memory of transgressions and we mustn't hold any grudges. This is really difficult to achieve as well, but every morning we need to wake up with no memory of what happened. It's a clean slate and we start a new day and everything comes up roses. This was a tough gig for us as well, but otherwise, we just found we were just spiraling into the next meltdown and the whole next day was crap as well. And it just went on and compounded and compounded. It's really tough when you don't want to wake up every morning because you're worried about the day, how it's going to be with your ASD child. So just let it go. Don't hold on to a grudge and just wake up full of hope and full of joy for the child in your life. We need to back each other up in our parenting styles. So parents or partners must trust each other and back each other up. And the parent or carer who's present at the time should deliver the punishment. Never use, just wait until your mother gets home, or wait until I tell your father, or whoever's there has to deal with the issue. And once the issue is dealt with, then it's finished with. By all means, have a whinge and a bitch to your partner later when they come home, but never in the earshot of your child. And we all know our ASD children have supersonic hearing. Our son can be down the other end of the house and we'll be whispering about him and he'll say, I can hear you. So whoever's there delivers the punishment. It's short and sharp. It's never delayed, because our kids are in trouble more often than others. And having to wait for punishment can intensify any anxiety they might be experiencing. All right, so also we need to, your wife or girlfriend or partner may have had enough by the time you walk through the door in the afternoon, and she'll probably say something like, you deal with them, I've had enough of this. Just acknowledge that she's probably borne the brunt of the behaviour throughout the day and she needs a break. Meltdowns and unwanted behaviours usually happen during the day when you dads are at work. But you don't need to go mad at the child again. You don't need to chastise them. Instead, just simply acknowledge the incident without anger or judgment. For example, you might say, I heard you had a bad day today, buddy. Never mind, we all have bad days sometimes. Adopting this technique will free you to enjoy the time you spend with your child more. You can play and interact with them without having to discipline past incidents, because as dads, I know as dads you think, I want to be such a good committed dad. I want to show my wife or partner that, I'm in charge here and I can punish the child. But really, you're just your whole relationship with your child will be one of punishment and going cross at them and disciplining them. So just acknowledge that mum has probably disciplined the child. Acknowledge her upset and say, I feel for your love, and etc., and just tell your son, yep, you've had a bad day, buddy, never mind, and get on with being his dad. You don't want to always be cross at him. Get on with having a few minutes of time with him before bed. Read a story or play a game or go outside and kick a football. When he learns to trust that he's not going to get into trouble from you again, he'll really look forward to building that relationship with you as well. So do discuss with your partner, let them let off steam, but do it in a time that your ASD child can't hear you. I'm going to talk now about lifestyle differences. Understanding that adjusting our expectations or lifestyle isn't wrong or less. It's just different. We've got to style our life so that we can have meaningful and happy ASD family relationships. Our lives aren't the same as those who don't have autism in their life. So we've got to find a way to be happy to be fulfilled with the children we have and the partners in our life. So what you need to know is that what other people think of you is none of your business. We need to let go of other people's opinion of our parenting skills. They don't live with a child with autism. You're always going to get, oh, but my child does that. I think they need a good stiff smack, or, I think you should punish them, or why don't you ground them, or blah, blah, blah. Just smile politely and nod and everything, but don't take offence. You can also stand your ground a little bit and say, look, my child has autism. Because they're going to be saying, oh, every child does that, every child does this. But yes, they do to a degree, but not to the degree of autism. So just let it go. Be like Elsa from Frozen and just let it go. You need to make your friends and family aware of what ASD is and what it looks like. Don't be upset with or scold your child because of their characteristics of ASD. It's simply how their brains work. When your child appears rude or says something inappropriate, just keep reminding in a neutral tone about using manners or tell them what appropriate behaviour is. It's easy to forget that ASD is a real condition because our kids look like other kids. The characteristics aren't visible. But neither's epilepsy, and we wouldn't chastise a child for having seizures. I really need you to make that leap of faith and understand that your child is doing the absolute best he can at every moment of every day. So if that best looks like a meltdown, it's up to us to investigate what's happened. We need to style our family and social life around ASD needs, particularly sensory needs. Not just at home, but everywhere we go, to the shops, to a friend's house. So think with your sensory brain. If it's too loud, too bright, too fast, too busy, too smelly, the outing is going to be unsuccessful and no one will have a good time. So when you're going out, you need to establish a chill zone or a sanctuary wherever you go. When you arrive at that friend's house, find a spot your child can retreat to if socialising becomes overwhelming. This could be a bedroom, a walk-in wardrobe, or even under a bed. Let him have his iPad and headphones or other favourite activity there. But do set up clear conditions for the chill zone. That is, it's for your child's exclusive use. So he goes there because he needs to be by himself and chill out. He'll rejoin the group if and when he's able to. So it's not for every other kid that's there to go and join him. It's not for your host to go in and say, come on out. Why don't you come out? He's in there because he's had enough. And everybody needs to understand that. If he's happy, you can stay longer on the outing and it gives you some time out. So this is applicable for if you have a family Christmas. Anything you do, you need to set up that chill zone. Also understand that when you're socialising, your child needs to know the timing schedule of the outing and you really need to stick to it so that he can trust that you mean what you say. For example, when you make a plan to go to a barbecue, talk about what time you're going, what types of activities are likely to happen there, who will be there, how many people, and how long you intend to stay. If you say you're going to stay a couple of hours, you'll need to clarify whether your child thinks a couple of hours is 2 or 3. And know that your child believes that what you say is what you mean. So don't be flippant with your use of language. He's likely to come to you at the designated time and say, it's time to go. To encourage him to trust you, you should thank him for his timekeeping ability, stand up and make an immediate departure. Remember, we're trying to set our kids up for success. Trust takes a very long time for ASD individuals to establish, and it can be undone in an instant. I can't stress enough to watch your use of literal language. We need to establish safety plans for outings and ensure all family members know the plan. For example, if a child gets lost or has a meltdown and runs away, have a pre-arranged meeting point or place to go. If you're at the park, the child could go to the swings. If you're at the shopping centre, Pick a spot the child knows the way to very well, perhaps McDonald's or Boost Juice. Understand that ASD children are often better with solo rather than team sports. Things like swimming, tai chi, karate, tennis. They're very rule-oriented, so if they're not athletic, they can be involved in sports in other ways. They can be a water boy, a scorer, a referee. They can be a statistic gatherer. Always be looking for alternate modes of engagement. In other words, think outside the square yourselves. Dads, you need to enforce some couple time. You need the ones to plan a date night, maybe fortnightly. You need to suggest going for a walk, sitting on the beach and watching a sunset. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to be a regular break away from your child where you spend time with each other, and you need to use the time to reconnect as a couple. Parenting a kid on the spectrum is a tough gig. Try not to get bogged down when you're spending time alone. Try not to get bogged down talking about child issues. This is really hard because, yes, you want to blurt it all out, you want to vent, but you really need to stay connected and be a couple. So get a babysitter, register for some supported accommodation, engage family or friends, but make sure whoever you engage has a very good knowledge of ASD, because if your child's not completely comfortable, he won't be happy and you'll be less likely to have regular outings. Those of you who are still married need to know that parents of children on the spectrum have a much higher divorce rate, and this is directly related to the stress of parenting an ASD child. Now it's time for my advice for the journey forward. You need to be always looking for creative solutions and alternate pathways. In life, we're taught that if we start at A and want to get to D, that we go from A to B to C to D. But life with autism is a little bit different. We start at A and our destination is still D, but from A we might visit P, then K, and then L, and then back to B, then X, and then O, then C, and so on. Our journey isn't wrong, it's just different. I was very desperate to have the same journey as everybody else, A to B to C to D. But Michael helped me realise that we only get one journey. Ours wasn't wrong, that we were starting at A and that D was always our destination. But we had to enjoy the journey we're on, and our journey was much more we saw a lot of different things and experienced lots of different pathways, and we needed to enjoy that. We never take no for an answer, and we always look for solutions to problems. We must link all behaviour to the characteristics of ASD. ASD comes first and everything else comes later. You'd be surprised how often I'm asked, so how do we know if it's the ASD or if it's behaviour? Well, if the child has ASD, it's always ASD. We have to help our kid maximise their strengths and minimise their weaknesses, because this leads to self-acceptance. Your child's going to question who they are a lot during their childhood, their adolescence, and their early adulthood. Help them to understand that they're doing the best they can and that they're wonderful individuals by maximising their strengths. We also need to get really serious about the effects of anxiety. It's not enough to acknowledge that your child is anxious. We need to be actively doing something to try and decrease anxiety. It's not enough to know that your child's anxious and taking medication for anxiety if they're still anxious. The statistic is that a child with ASD is 10 times more likely than the general population to die by suicide. And for me, that's an unacceptable statistic. Our son has a severe anxiety disorder diagnosis as well as ASD. And so we try a lot of alternate therapies, hypnotherapy, acupuncture, exercise, yoga, getting in nature. And as an adult, as a 28-year-old now, he does those practices daily. At the moment, he's not medicated, but there are times in his life where he has been. Understand that medication isn't the full solution. It helps support them while they're working through something, but we have to get really serious about the effects of anxiety. All right, that concludes our ASD for Dads webinar. I want to thank you all for participating in the session. I hope you've taken away some strategies and support techniques that help you parent your child more enjoyably. In the next few days, you'll receive an evaluation email, and please complete it as I value your feedback. I'm going to stay online for the next 5 or 10 minutes for a few questions. On the screen, you'll see my website, aspergerchild.com, and you can email me, nell@aspergerchild.com. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's session. Please, you can type your questions in the chat box there, and I'll endeavour to answer them. Come on, don't be shy. Somebody must have a question. Does anyone want clarification on any of the points I've raised? All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to sign off now. Nobody's asking questions. Do email me if you think of something tomorrow. Have a good evening. Bye.